Before we move on to Blaze, I just want to take a quick look at how Meteor handles loading code to the server and the client, because sometimes we want to write code that's only for the server and only for the client. For example, with Blaze templates, we only want to load them to the client. So how do we specify where code should be loaded? Well, there's basically three different ways to do this. The first is using a meteor.isServer or isClient check, and that returns a boolean, so we would put it in an if statement. So say if meteor.isServer, then do something. And second method is by creating a server.js or client.js file, and the server.js file will only be loaded to the server, and same thing for the client. The third method is pretty similar. It's by creating a server and client directory, so everything inside the server directory only gets loaded to the server. And these are all pretty similar, except for one major difference is that if you create a file that is run on both the client and the server and use a meteor.isServer check, that code inside the meteor.isServer check will be loaded to the client. It just won't run on the client, but it'll be visible on the client. So you don't want to put anything secret in there, like some secret API key that you want to put either in a server.js file or inside a file that's in the server directory. So just keep that in mind. And anything else that's not in server.js or server or client.js or client will get loaded to both. So let's say I create a foo.js file, that'll get loaded to both, and inside of there I would use a meteor.isServer check if I only wanted to run a certain part of the code inside of server. Beyond that, there are a couple of other directories I want to mention. The first is lib. So if you create a lib directory, that'll be used in both, and the code inside of lib directory gets run first. So you want to use that if you're setting up some sort of configuration, or when you're setting up your collections, as we'll see later. You want to put that inside a lib directory or a lib file, and that'll get loaded before the rest of the code. Otherwise, Meteor loads the code in alphabetical order based on the file name, and also it loads the deepest nested directories first. So if you have /server/ some directory, some other directory, that code will get loaded before /server and files in there. So just keep that in mind, that it loads deepest nested code first. You can also create a lib directory inside of server and client, and what that'll do is it'll load the code only to the server or the client, but it'll load everything inside the lib directory first. So that's pretty useful as well. And the second directory I want to mention is public. So if you create a public directory, everything you put in there will be accessible publicly as an asset. So let's say your images and fonts, you'd want to put them in there so that you can call them using an image tag or whatever. And I just want to look quickly over how to structure projects. Generally, the simplest way to structure it would be to have a lib directory for shared code, and everything in there will get loaded first. A client directory for client-only code with a lib directory inside of there for stuff that needs to get loaded first on the client. A server directory for server-only code, and same with a lib directory in there for code that needs to be loaded first on the server. And then a public directory, and I usually have a fonts and images subdirectory for my fonts and images. But we'll work with this as we develop our apps, so you don't need to worry about too much right now. I just wanted to mention how Meteor works at loading files and loading code to specific environments.